wanted to kind of go over what it looks like on how to choose the right location for investment properties. And there's so many things that go into this. It's not just the right location, but it's also what type of investment property you're looking to do. So are you looking to buy and hold? Are you looking to flip the property? Are you looking to use it as an Airbnb? So many factors are included in what it looks like to calculate the location versus what you're trying to do with the property. So the first is, let's decide what you're looking to do with the property, whether it's an Airbnb. Location is pretty important, as a lot of people are trying to determine the distance from a certain venue or event that they're going to, or reason why they're even going to that spot in the first place. However, if you're within 10 to 12, 15 minutes of that destination, more than likely the location, the specific location, isn't going to be a huge factor, because in Airbnb, you're not getting the actual address right away. So for me, when I invested in Airbnb, I invested in it in more of a up and coming area where I could get in at a decent price, put some work into the property, rehab it, get that appreciation, but also still have it in a location that my guests are comfortable with and that are convenient for everything else. And then from there, also, it's in an area where I know in the next 5 to 10 years is going to wind up being massively appreciated, because it's in an area that is growing. There's a lot of redevelopment happening. So we are in that process of, I think I'm in maybe year 3 on a couple of those properties right now. So it's really nice to see every time I go to visit those properties. I am constantly looking at all the new development. It's exciting. It almost makes me want to tear down that house and redevelop it into what they're doing. And maybe that's something that I do in the near future as properties appreciate. So those are things that you would be looking at when it comes to, if you're choosing to do an Airbnb short term. You're definitely looking at location as far as, is it close to venues? Is it close to the areas that guests that are booking are going to want to stay? When it comes to long term, you're looking for a location that has the amenities, the things that the school districts, the things that are important for families and people who are renting homes. You want to make sure that it's in a good area as far as crime goes. You want to do your research and look at those statistics. You also want to make sure, you could also look at, what the values are now and what we think they're going to be. This is another prime example that you can pick the property and know that you do the work for, and then wind up having that appreciate as well. And you can force that appreciation through those repairs that you do at the beginning. Now, the biggest part about the location for whether it truly matters right away or not is if you're doing that fix and flip. That is the one thing that you don't really have where time is on your side, where you're not going to be able to just say, okay, we're going to wait a little while and hope that this neighborhood turns around. So when you're finding the properties that you want to rehab and turn around and flip them, they need to be in an area that already is gentrified, is already in that up and coming, or you're pricing it accordingly to be one of the first in that neighborhood. The perfect example would be Baltimore City. There's a lot of properties that are getting turned over at this point. Are you in that area where they've already started turning over, and so you've got great comparables in that specific neighborhood? Or are you moving into a neighborhood where you'll be the first one on that block, while you might have the nicest property on that block because it's the only one currently on that block? You're not going to get the same highest value that someone else who's got consistent comparables in the direct neighborhood will get. So if you're going to be the trendsetter, just know that your value may be a little bit different than someone else in a neighborhood where they've already started that turnover of the nicer properties. The market dynamics and neighborhood analysis is really important when it comes to all of these things. Like I said, depending on the types of properties you're doing, it's really important to decide what it is that is important to you guys. For me, when I did my long-term properties, I'm buying in an area that I know is a quiet neighborhood, or if that was a single family home or a townhouse where I know it would be comfortable for my tenants to live. If it's apartments, I am looking to make sure the other apartments around it, the noise, if it's on more of a busier street, if there's playgrounds or what it is right around, to make sure that, once again, the tenants feel comfortable. If there's not laundry inside, is there a laundromat close by? Is there the availability for me to be able to put in laundry? Just those different amenities, depending on the level of investment you're doing. Obviously, single family homes, you would expect those types of amenities with laundry to be in the home. So that would not be the biggest concern on that side, but it would be on the apartment side. So once again, the location and how close it is to those types of amenities. The proximity to employment centers and different things like that. So Airbnb and short term, that's also important. We get a lot of Airbnb guests coming because they are traveling to their corporate headquarters. And so there's a lot of businesses that bring their employees from all over who are working remote normally. So if that's your target market, you want to make sure that you're close to those areas. Target areas for long-term, same thing. So in our area in Maryland, you kind of have a wider range, because if it's going to be a long-term, people are kind of comfortable with traveling a little bit to get to work, if that's their commute, in order to get a nicer property. So if someone's working in DC, they may be willing to drive 30 minutes, 40 minutes, maybe even an hour, depending on traffic. And so as long as you're within that vicinity and you can offer them a nice property that might be cheaper than what they can get, closer to DC, closer to Baltimore City, closer to Annapolis, wherever they may be coming from, that distance is not as big of a deal as, say, your Airbnb. Now, when you're looking at distance and location on the apartment side, some of them may have vehicles, some of them may not. So what are the distance and location to public transit, the metro, things that are important in order for them to get to and from work, and all the other activities that they might need. The appreciation potential, I was kind of touching on that when we were talking about Airbnb, but the appreciation potential is key for all of them. You don't have as much when you're doing that short-term flip, because you're forcing that appreciation in a short amount of time. With the flips that you're doing, for example, I'm in the process of, I just put a property under contract right now. I'm taking a rancher and turning it into a colonial. And so I'm massively forcing appreciation on the property, but I'm doing it in a short amount of time compared to what a normal rancher would be if I were to just flip it really quick. So I'm taking it and completely changing it, and that's what's giving me that appreciation. But if I were to take that same rancher and just add, a couple things to it, it's not the same type of appreciation. While it's also not the same expense, it's one of those things that just depends on how much risk versus reward, how much time you want to put into it. But no matter what, those flips are not one of those things where you've got time on your hand to allow additional appreciation to accumulate. Everything that you're doing is for your own appreciation. You've got the long-term investment with long-term rentals. That's your best bet for allowing regular to time appreciation over the years, not just any repairs that you've done. So for example, some of the long-term investments that I've had, I hadn't touched as far as mortgages go in a while. I hadn't touched any of those. And I just allowed the tenant's rent to be paying them down, paying the mortgage. I allowed the appreciation to accumulate over the years. And so then at the height of the market, when the interest rates were down, I was able to take, it was almost close to $1 million. I think it was around $800,000 out of those properties at a lower interest rate, and refi them all into a bundle loan with a commercial bank and pull out that money and being able to reinvest it. And so that's important, because I have tenants then paying my mortgage for me. I'm making money monthly. Any of the appreciation till the time was right and the market was at its highest while the interest rates were also low. And I was able to then pull that out and be able to reinvest it in additional properties. The long-term investments is one of the best ways to really allow the appreciation to work for you in your favor, not just with the forced appreciation. One story that I was going to tell was, so we had an investor who bought in an area that is more up and coming. This was going to be for long-term rent. So it was in more of an up and coming area, but he was basing his numbers and his rental projections and the value of rehab that he was doing on other properties that had sold. The only difference is it wasn't in the same neighborhood. right? So we were just in a different neighborhood. There were different, he was more of the first, like I was just saying, like a Baltimore City or something like that. He was more of the first in that neighborhood where all the other properties were not quality properties. And he thought he was going to still be able to get that high rent value like the others were getting, even though he was outside of that footprint that he had. So while he did a great job on the purchase price, he did a great job on the rehab. The thing that he didn't follow through with or didn't have the right people helping with was what the numbers would look like at the end for him on the rental amount, because it's not the same as one, another example, I've got somebody in Carroll County, someone in New Windsor who's got a very nice house. She wants to go off of rental numbers that you would get in Westminster, which is definitely not the same, right? You're looking at in Westminster, I could get her for her really nice house, probably about $4,200, which is still a lot of money for a rental, but I could probably get that in Westminster. But in New Windsor, that's not going to be the same dollar amount. So it just depends. Just because you've got a really nice property and the best in that area doesn't mean you're going to get the highest dollar that you could if that was in a different location. So every location can be made into long-term, short-term. Well, I can't say every location for short-term, but every location could do fix and flip, could do long-term investment. And then obviously it just depends on where you are for short-term if the market's demanding that. But you just have to know your numbers and understand that it's not going to be the same amount that, say, someone 10 minutes down the road in a different zip code is going to get. Or even potentially, depending on how saturated the area is, the next neighborhood over, or, whatever that looks like, it's just going to be a little bit different. So understanding the location, understanding the small intricacies that the change of a zip code or the change of, a neighborhood could actually truly affect your numbers on resale, on flipping. I mean, goodness, even on short term, when you're putting in the calculations of exactly where your property is, if you've got the right software, it'll calculate what the market demand and what the monthly or the nightly charge will be. And so if you're expecting to go off of what you were just seeing on Airbnb or VRBO or anything like that, instead of truly knowing what your numbers are comparatively, you could be in for a bit of a shock. And, you want to make sure that everything is set up properly and that you've got the right people. So in those situations, does your realtor understand the property management and rental world, or do they strictly know buy and sell? Do they understand investments? If it's a fix and flip, do they understand what trying to time the market and what that's going to look like in 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, whenever the project is over? If all else stays the same and your property is very similar to a property currently on the market, what we could get for it. Same thing with the long term, going from that to what it looks like. We have high interest rates right now. It's a little harder for people to get into these investment properties knowing their mortgage payment is going to be a lot different now than it was before. So what does that look like? How do you understand because rent payments have gone up as well, but not at the same rate that the interest rates have. So understanding what that looks like, knowing your numbers. And what I've been telling people here recently is, as long as you can make a little bit of a profit on your monthly mortgage payment with your tenant rent, you're not necessarily always going to find that home run like we were able to do before, where you're getting, a lot more money per month. But the good thing is if you're able to find a property that works and makes sense for you, that the tenant is paying all the expenses, you're making a little bit of money in a few years when the interest rate, because the interest rate will come down a little bit. I'm not saying it's going to go back down to where it was, but you're able to then refinance the property and make more money at that point. You've already got appreciation on your side. You've got every year you really should be increasing the property rent. So you've already got that appreciation, additional revenue coming in. And then when you've got the ability to refinance down the road, you've got that additional revenue. So there's a lot of things that work on your side, as long as you understand this is more of a long-term play and not I'm doing this long-term rentals in order to get rich quick right now. It's one of those compounding effects where if you kind of just let it do its thing, just like the stock market when it's doing well and things like that, as long as you're letting it do its thing, it will start compounding and you'll start seeing those really big returns. Like I had mentioned before, when I was refining all of my properties at the same time and how much money I was able to pull out. And then what I was able to do with that money and buy more properties. So it's just, it's being able to leverage what you have, use what you have, allow it to pay down your mortgage while it also appreciates. And I've got a lot of owners who don't want to increase their rent every year, but at minimum, increasing it. Our lease, I think, says at minimum 3%. That should be standard across the board, right? I mean, because here's the thing, 3% in reality is not that much money. Cost of living and everything else is going out substantially from that. So 3% is at least a good starting point, right? When the market was really hot for rentals, you should have been increasing it to whatever the market demand was. And the reason why it's more beneficial to do that, even for your tenants now than in the long term, one, if the tenants had to move, they would never find a property that they were getting for the rent value that you were offering, because everyone else is charging what market rate should be, or they should be charging what market rate should be. So one, if they moved, it's going to cost them more. Two, if you just slowly increase their rent, it's a lot easier for them to make those payments than, say, when you do want to sell, but your realtor is telling you you're not at market rate, and then you want to try and change their rate at the end of their lease term to whatever market rate is. That's going to be such a massive increase to them that they're not going to be able to handle it. So if you were able to do this, throughout the course of their lease, we've seen so many that, some of these people are paying for, an apartment that should be going for $1,300. They're still charging $700. They're doing everyone a disservice for that, because that extra money could be going towards repairs for the property, the upkeep on the property, so many things in addition to making the landlord money. But not doing that is really doing a disservice to those people who also then eventually want to sell. And like your point, we can sell the property, but don't expect to get top dollar for it, what a normal investor will pay, because now if they're in a written lease, they're stuck with that lease for the life of that lease. So if it's another year or whatever it is, so they can't make financial changes to that lease. So they're stuck with that. If any of the properties are vacant, they're now responsible for finding tenants. And so now you're just putting a lot more work on the new owner, which is why you're compensating them at a lesser value, because now they have to basically pick up all the slack that you didn't do as a landlord during the term of owning that property.